One of the essential claims of Christianity, as we already saw, is that God exists. The very first doctrine that we encountered as we looked at the major doctrines of the Christian worldview is the doctrine of God. So Christianity obviously requires the existence of God. But are there good reasons to believe that God exists? The main idea of the chapter that we're talking about today is that the world makes sense if God exists, and it makes no sense if God does not exist. Here's one way to think about the general argument of the entire chapter. So I'll call this the general argument of chapter. Step 1. If there is no God, then nothing you think or feel or experience or do makes any sense at all. Step 2, but some of the things you think, feel, and experience make sense. Conclusion, so God exists. Let's look at a more detailed general argument. So I'm going to go into a little more detail here and look at the arguments the considerations that the chapter is wanting us to think about. Step 1 in this more detailed argument of the chapter. Step 1. If the Christian God does not exist, then contingency, value, morality, reason, minds, and science are unexplainable. Step 2. But contingency, value, morality, reason, minds, and science are explainable. Conclusion 3. Therefore, the Christian God exists. Now, I actually think that there's an argument for God's existence from literally everything. That is, for everything that is real, there's an argument for God's existence from that thing. So while our author is right to focus on the things he does, it's a great chapter, it is possible to focus on anything in the universe and show that it points to God. Okay, we're going to return to an important principle that we talked about earlier. Remember this principle? I called it the content principle. The content of someone's claim or belief determines the method by which we discover its truth or falsity. It's a slight variation on it, but it's the same principle basically. The content of a claim determines the method by which we figure out whether it's true or not. So, a maybe simpler way of putting it is this: the nature of something determines the nature of the evidence for it. Right? So let me give you some examples. If I tell you there's no water in the fridge, how should we determine whether that claim is true? What do we need to do? Well, we got to think about the content. What is the claim? It's a claim that there's no water in a particular location. So in order to figure out whether it's true or not, I've got to do something, right? Consulting my phone is probably not going to help. Turning on the TV is probably not going to help. The nature of the claim determines the nature of the evidence for that claim. Here's another claim. Suppose I tell you the brain has nearly 100 billion neurons. How should we determine whether that claim is true? What do we need to do? Well, we need to do some counting, right? And we need to count in a particular place. How about this claim? Rape is wrong. How should we determine whether that claim is true? Well, we got to look at the content of the claim and figure out how to search for evidence for it. And now the same thing, of course, is true for the claim that God exists. Do not go looking in your refrigerator or in someone's brain to figure out if God exists. If you do that, you show that you don't really understand the claim at all. Let's look at one of my favorite arguments for God's existence. I'm not going to be covering all of them, and I'm going to cover a few of them differently than they are in the book. This is called the cosmological argument for God's existence. The cosmological argument for God's existence. Now, there are actually many versions of this of the cosmological argument, so we're going to look at one of them. But it starts with a basic idea. Something exists. Something exists. Now, in the book, the focus is on Descartes' claim, right? I exist, or I think, therefore I am. But we actually don't need to even bring that up, because even if it's possible to doubt your own existence, I don't think it is, but pretend it is, even if it's possible to doubt your own existence, it's not possible to doubt the existence of something. Something exists. It's not possible to deny that something exists. Try it. Try to deny that something exists. Your very denial exists. So something exists. You can't deny that something exists coherently. Okay. Contingent is a term that is used throughout this argument, the cosmological argument. So let's get clear on what that means. For something to be contingent means that it exists and it could have failed to exist, right? The idea here is just look around you, right? Everything that you experience, everything in your day-to-day life that you encounter is a contingent thing. The table that you're working on, the computer that you're listening and watching this on, you yourself, your clothing, the stars, the moon, blah, 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 all of that stuff exists, and it could have failed to exist, right? And in fact, there was a time when none of those things existed, and there will be a time when none of those things exist. Okay, so that's what it means for something to be contingent. Now, I'm going to give you a simple version. It's more complicated than what you have in your book, but it's still a simple version of the cosmological argument for God's existence. And I'll comment on premises that need a little more explanation. Premise 1. If something is contingent, that is, if something exists and could have failed to exist, then its existence is explained by another. Okay, so the idea is this. Contingent things have to be explained. Their existing needs to be explained by some other thing. That's the idea. Okay? Not very controversial. Step 2. The set of all contingent things is itself contingent. Okay, let me explain that. The set of all contingent things, that's just the collection of everything that is contingent. So that's going to include you, it's going to include me, it's going to include our clothes, it's going to include the trees, it's going to include the table, the computer, the sun, the moon, all of that stuff, right, is going to be included in the set of all contingent things. And the claim is that set itself is contingent. Now, some of you might be familiar with a certain type of fallacy, right? A fallacy of composition. And so you might be worried that we're committing a fallacy of composition here. We're not. This is easy to demonstrate. If a set contains all and only contingent things, then the set, of course, has to be contingent. Here's how to show this. Well, if the set contains all and only contingent things, then that means each and every member of the set is something that could fail to exist. But if a member of a set fails to exist, then the set fails to exist. So the set itself must be contingent. That's just what it is for something to be contingent. It exists and could fail to exist. So the set exists and it could fail to exist. Okay, so step 2, the set of all contingent things is itself contingent. 3, therefore, that set, the set of all contingent things, has to be explained by another. Right? That just follows from premise 1 and 2. Therefore, the set of all contingent things has to be explained by another. Premise 4. Now, nothing in the set can explain the set, right? Otherwise, you'd have a kind of a vicious circularity, right? If you have a member of the set explaining the existence of the set, then that means that member explains its own existence. But remember, we already said that a contingent thing has to be explained by another. So that would be a violation of that principle of premise 1. So nothing in the set can explain the existence of the set. So 5, therefore, the set has to be explained by something outside of the set. That is, the set of all contingent things, the collection of all contingent things, has to be explained by something that is not a member of the set of all contingent things. 6, therefore, something non-contingent explains the set of contingent things. 7, and we're done. 7, therefore, there is a necessary being that explains everything else. And that being is God. So here's the idea. Remember, we've got our set. It's the set of all contingent things. What's included in the set? Every single solitary thing that exists but could have failed to exist. That set has to be explained by something outside the set. So the thing outside the set can't be contingent because everything contingent is in the set. So the thing outside the set is non-contingent. Well, what does it mean to be non-contingent? Well, it means to exist but not to be able to fail to exist. That's a necessary being. Remember, we heard about necessary beings earlier. So that means the necessary being is the explanation for everything else that exists. And that being is God. So notice that this is we've shown one of also the major attributes of God. God is necessary. It's not possible that God not exist. That is one of the ways in which God is completely different from everything else that exists. Now, this argument fits nicely with the Christian worldview. Since the Christian worldview maintains that God exists, that God is necessary, and that God is free to create or not create, which explains the universe's contingency. The universe is contingent because it exists, but didn't have to. It's the result of a free action of God. Think about this. This argument shows us that existence itself, just your very existence, the tree's very existence, your shirt's very existence, the table's very existence, ultimately points to God. God explains the existence of things that require explanations for their existence outside of themselves. Anything that requires an explanation for its existence outside of itself is ultimately explained by God. God alone is self-explaining because God is necessary and God is ultimate. God is absolute.